21 million Americans watched as Jasmine Crockett unleashed 327 pages of explosive evidence that left Scott Jennings frozen for 29 seconds on live TV. The air inside Congress cracked like thunder, rage, fear, and humiliation colliding in real time. Every insult hurled at Jasmine only made her fire burn hotter. Every second of silence felt like a dagger to Jennings' career. The what secret inside those 327 pages was so devastating it shook the very foundation of American politics. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 21 million Americans, that's how many pairs of eyes froze on their screens the moment the gavel struck in Washington, D.C., 2025. The Capitol was no longer just a building, it was a battlefield, its marble walls echoing with the weight of a nation on the brink. Outside, thousands of protesters clashed, their chants shaking the city, some demanding justice, others defending the very lies that had brought America to its knees. Helicopters cut through the sky, like vultures circling a dying beast. Inside, the air was electric, heavy, suffocating. Every camera was live, every heartbeat was war. At the center of this chaos sat Jasmine Crockett, not just a congresswoman, but a symbol to millions of forgotten voices. She was fire incarnate, a woman who refused to bow, who carried centuries of struggle in her voice. Her eyes burned with the memory of ancestors who had bled for a vote, for dignity, for survival. She was not here to debate, she was here to fight. And in her chest, that fire raged like a storm, waiting to be unleashed on live television. Across from her, exuding arrogance like cheap cologne, sat Scott Jennings, the strategist, the spin doctor. The man who turned lies into weapons and wielded them with a smile that dripped with disdain. He was polished, calculating, cold, a vulture feeding on America's fractures. Where Jasmine's voice carried conviction, Jennings' tongue dripped with venom. He didn't fear her, he mocked her. To him, she was just another opponent to be crushed, another headline to manipulate. He straightened his tie, leaned back in his chair, and smirked as if the entire hearing were his stage. But this wasn't theater. This was war, and the nation knew it. The stakes were carved into the air, a live congressional hearing broadcast to millions, investigating extremism, election lies, and the silent hands funding America's descent into chaos. Everyone in the chamber understood that tonight would not end in compromise. Someone's career, someone's reputation, someone's very identity would burn before the night was over. The atmosphere cracked with tension. Lawmakers shifted, then easily. Reporters whispered. Cameras zoomed tighter on every twitch, every bead of sweat. Outside, chants grew louder. Truth, justice, Crockett. Clashing against Stand with Scott. The country was split in half, and in this room, those halves were embodied into figures: fire and ice, conviction and deceit, Jasmine and Jennings. Jasmine adjusted her crimson blazer, its color screaming defiance. Every movement deliberate, every breath heavy with resolve. She knew what waited: humiliation, insults, smears. But she also knew why she was here, not for herself, but for the millions silenced by fear, for the voices drowned out by lies. She was ready to bleed on that floor if that's what it took. Jennings tilted his head, lips curled into that insufferable grin, as if whispering, "You can't touch me." The gavel slammed, the chamber fell silent. America leaned in. When truth and lies collide on national television, who will survive the fallout? The announcement dropped like a thunderclap across America. A nationally televised congressional hearing on extremism, election lies, and the shadow money fueling chaos. Every news outlet flashed the headline in blood-red banners, anchors warning that this could be the most explosive hearing in a generation. The stakes weren't just political, they were existential. The future of truth itself would be on trial. Jasmine Crockett's name was the first whispered, then shouted. She had been chosen to lead the questioning. Her allies cheered, her enemies scoffed, and her community held its breath. Phones rang off the hook in her district office. Pastors called from pulpits, mothers from kitchens, veterans from hospital beds. Their voices carried one refrain: "Don't back down, fight for us." These weren't just supporters, they were survivors, people who had lost family to conspiracy theories, who had been attacked for standing in line to vote, who had been told their voices didn't matter. They were handing her their pain, their rage, their hope, and demanding that she turn it into fire on the floor of Congress. Then came the confirmation that set the nation ablaze. Scott Jennings, Trump's strategist-in-chief, had been named a key witness. The smug architect of disinformation, the smiling assassin of democracy, the man who had mocked Jasmine's every speech on cable news would now sit across from her under oath, with millions watching. Cable hosts salivated, headlines screamed Crockett vs. Jennings, the showdown, and social media erupted with a digital drumbeat of anticipation. Outside the Capitol, barricades rose higher as the frenzy built. America wasn't preparing for a hearing, it was preparing for a war. But Jasmine knew this battle would be fought long before the cameras rolled. Her nights became a blur of case files, late-night study sessions under the sterile glow of desk lamps, and stacks of evidence taller than her arms could carry. She traced dark money trails through shadowy PACs, memorized donors' names that reeked of corruption, and highlighted every contradiction Jennings had ever uttered on TV. Sleep became a rumor, her coffee mug stacking like tombstones of the hours she sacrificed, and then there were the calls. A teacher in Georgia sobbing that her students repeated lies from their parents until classrooms felt like minefields. A soldier in Michigan who fought overseas only to return to a family torn apart by conspiracy theories. A grandmother in Texas who clutched her absentee ballot as if it were the last piece of freedom she had. Each voice etched deeper into Jasmine's resolve. This wasn't preparation, it was a baptism of fire. Meanwhile, Jennings made his rounds on cable news, smirking at every camera. "They're sending Crockett. Please, she's just a loudmouth with no teeth. I'll shred her in 10 minutes flat." His words dripped with arrogance, but his eyes flickered with something else, fear of the one person who never backed down when men like him sneered. The countdown had begun. The Capitol's marble floors would soon witness a collision of fire and ice, conviction and DC, live before the eyes of a fractured nation. And as the world braced for impact, one question thundered louder than all the rest. Can one woman's voice cut through a machine built on deception, or will she be swallowed whole by it? The chamber was packed so tightly it felt like oxygen itself had abandoned the room. Reporters jostled for space, cameras clicked in machine gun bursts, and every major network cut to the same feed. Live from Washington, the hearing that could change America. Millions tuned in, scrolling feverishly on phones, television remotes forgotten on coffee tables. Outside, chants ricocheted off the Capitol steps, a collision of voices. Truth now. Clashing with Stand with Scott, the building shook as if democracy itself trembled with them. At the center of the chaos, Scott Jennings leaned back in his chair, a smirk carved across his face like a scar. The smirk wasn't just arrogance, it was performance. He adjusted his tie, whispered something mocking to the aide at his side, and looked directly into the cameras with eyes that dared America to blink. To him, this was not accountability. This was theater, and he believed he had already written the script. Then came Jasmine Crockett. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She rose with a calm that felt like the silence before a storm tears a city apart. Her crimson jacket caught the light, blazing against the dark wood, a banner of defiance. She placed her hands firmly on the table, leaned toward the microphone, and when she spoke, her voice sliced through the static of the room with surgical precision. This hearing is not about Democrats versus Republicans. This hearing is about truth versus lies. It's about whether the American people will be ruled by fact or by fear. And let me be clear, fear has had its time. Her words detonated in the chamber. Gasps fluttered, pens froze mid-scratch, even the cameras seemed to hold still, desperate not to miss a syllable. Jasmine's voice carried history. She invoked the marchers of Selma, the murdered voices silenced by segregation, the voters purged from rolls simply for daring to exist. She tied their suffering to the present, to mothers harassed at polling stations, the communities drowned in misinformation, the children who no longer knew the difference between truth and propaganda. Every sentence struck like lightning, illuminating scars America tried to hide. On Twitter, X, hashtags exploded in real time. Hashtag Crockett is fire. Hashtag truth on trial. Hashtag Jennings vs. Crockett. Comment sections flooded with emojis, fists, flames. She's unstoppable, one user wrote. Another, this is the voice we've been waiting for. Networks cut live reactions from diners, barbershops, college campuses, strangers leaning over screens, shouting at televisions, tears streaming, fists pumping. For some, it was hope resurrected. For others, it was fury boiling. Jennings didn't flinch, not yet. He leaned closer to the mic, that smile widening into a blade, biding his time. His silence wasn't surrender, it was venom coiling, waiting for the strike. He tapped his pen on the desk, once, twice, like a countdown. The camera caught his lips mouthing something obscene toward Jasmine. She didn't even blink. The gavel struck to end opening remarks, but the real war hadn't begun. The chamber was silent for a breath, then the world seemed to lean in together, millions holding their breath as if waiting for an explosion. Jasmine had set the room ablaze. Jennings was ready to pour gasoline. And in that fragile pause, one question roared louder than the chants outside, louder than the headlines scrolling across screens, louder than the fear gripping America's chest. What will happen when Scott Jennings finally fires back? The air inside the chamber vibrated with tension as Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, eyes locked on Scott Jennings like a hawk sighting prey. Tapers rustled, cameras zoomed in, the entire room frozen on the edge of anticipation. "Mr. Jennings," she began, her voice low but sharp, slicing through the silence, "do you deny receiving funds from political action committees directly linked to extremist groups, funds funneled through dark channels, designed to destabilize this very democracy you claim to defend?" The words didn't just accuse, they indicted. Jennings leaned back in his chair, a smug grin stretching across his face. He didn't wait for her to finish. "Here we go again," he sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "This isn't about facts. This is about putting on a show. What you're watching, America, is pure political theater." His words echoed through the chamber like poison gas, infecting the silence with scorn. Some Republicans chuckled under their breath, their smirks aimed like daggers. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her voice rising, her eyes blazing. "Theater," she thundered. "This is not theater, this is America's survival." The room erupted. Reporters nearly dropped their pens, Lev bloggers typed furiously, and within seconds the phrase exploded across social media. #AmericaSurvival trended worldwide. Memes flooding Twitter, X, her words repeated in flashing banners on CNN and MSNBC. Outside, the crowd erupted into chants, fists pumping. "Survival, survival, survival." Jennings rolled his eyes, but the sweat beginning to form at his temples betrayed him. Jasmine pounced. "Answer the question. Did you, or did you not, accept money from organizations under federal investigation for ties to extremist violence?" The chamber tilted forward, every ear straining for his response. Jennings barked out a laugh, cold and hollow. "You're twisting narratives like you always do. You want me to look guilty because it fits your little storyline. But let's be clear, your party is the real threat. You peddle fear, division, and weakness. You are nothing more than a fraud in high heels." Gas shot through the room like gunfire. The insult hung heavy in the air, cutting deeper than politics. It was personal, it was venom, and it was meant to break her. But Jasmine only tightened her grip on the microphone, jaw clenched, her voice steady as steel. "Fraud," she said, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "The fraud is sitting right there, smirking at America, pretending he's above the law while cashing checks soaked in hate. You want theater? Fine. But know this, Mr. Jennings, the curtain is falling on your lies." The chamber shook with murmurs, lawmakers squirming, cameras devouring every second. Outside, chants grew deafening, echoing through marble and steel. Headlines blared across every network. "Crockett strikes hard. This is America's survival." Commentators called it the line of the decade, the moment one voice rose above the noise and set the tone for war. Jennings' smirk faltered, just slightly, his pen tapping nervously against the table. For the first time, America wondered if the manipulator had met his match. And as the crowd outside thundered louder, the question hung in the air like a blade above his head. Will Scott Jennings finally crumble under the weight of truth, or will he double down and drag America deeper into the fire? The tension in the chamber snapped like glass under pressure. Jennings leaned forward, no longer hiding behind his smirk, his voice dripping with venom that cut deeper than policy and went straight for the jugular. "Let's not pretend here," he snarled, his tone sharp enough to slice the silence. "You're not here because of merit. You're here because of optics, a black woman with a loud mouth perfect for the Democrats' circus. You've made a career out of playing victim, and America is sick of it." Gasps detonated across the chamber like a bomb. The insult didn't just pierce Jasmine, it sent shockwaves through every corner of the nation. Reporters' eyes widened, Pens dropped mid-sentence, camera shutters clicked like panicked heartbeats. On the line. Twitter. X ignited instantly. Did he just say that? Unbelievable racism on live TV. Clips spread at light speed. Hashtags multiplying like wildfire. Hashtag Jennings exposed. Hashtag racist on record. Millions of viewers sat frozen, rage boiling in their veins. Inside, the silence was suffocating, every second stretching like eternity. Jasmine didn't move, didn't flinch. She let the venom hang in the air, the weight of Jennings' words choking the room. Her eyes locked onto him, not with fury, but with something colder, something that made his smugness falter. Then, slowly, she leaned into the microphone, her voice low, controlled, like the quiet before a storm that levels a city. "Every word you just said," she began, her tone cutting through the chamber with surgical precision, "spits on America's promise. To promise that no matter your race, no matter your gender, no matter your background, you belong. You just told every child watching, every grandmother who marched, every soldier who bled for this country, that their fight was worthless." Her voice rose, sharp and unrelenting. "And I will not let you drag their sacrifice into the mud." The word struck with the force of a hammer. Jennings blinked, his grin twitching as the crowd outside roared louder, their chants turning into a thunderous wave that rattled the glass. Across the nation, living rooms and diners erupted cheers, sobs, fists pounding on tables. In Alabama, an elderly civil rights activist sat in her recliner, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "That's why we marched, that's why we bled, for this moment." Jasmine's stare never wavered. The chamber had transformed. It wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was a battlefield for America's soul. Every eye in the room bore down on Jennings, waiting for his response, waiting to see if the venom in his tongue could survive the fire she had unleashed. Lawmakers whispered, reporters scribbled, the tension so sharp it could draw blood. And yet, Jennings only leaned back, his arrogance cracking at the edges, pen tapping nervously on the wood, knowing millions were watching him drown. Outside, chants shook the earth itself. Crockett, Crockett, Crockett. In that moment, America was forced to confront its reflection. Was it a nation built on venom, or on vision? And as the cameras zoomed in, one question loomed over the chamber like thunder rolling across a fractured sky. Will America sigh with the poison of Jennings' hatred or the promise burning in Jasmine Crockett's voice? Scott Jennings snapped, his face flushed red, his fist slammed the table, and his voice thundered through the chamber. "Mark my words," he bellowed, spit flying as he jabbed a finger in Jasmine's direction. "Trump will return, and when he does, all of you, every single one of you traitors, will answer for this witch hunt. America will rise again, and you, Congresswoman Crockett, will be nothing but a footnote in the rubble." His words weren't an argument, they were a threat, a roar that turned the chamber into a pressure cooker ready to explode. Gasps ricocheted around the room. Reporters' heads jerked up, fingers hammering keyboards, live captions flashing across millions of screens. Jennings promises Trump's return. Outside, the crowd split in half, one side cheering wildly, the other screaming in rage. The chants collided like colliding storms, shaking the very marble of the Capitol. But Jasmine did not flinch, she did not blink. Instead, with chilling calm, she reached into her folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers, stamped with bold red letters, "Confidential." The chamber fell into a taut silence, anticipation dripping like sweat down every spine. She held the documents aloft, her eyes never leaving Jennings, her voice steady as steel. "These aren't theories, these aren't rumors. These are financial records, signed, sealed, undeniable, tying you, Mr. Jennings, to extremist donors who funded the same groups that stormed this Capitol on January 6th. Here." She slapped the first page down on the table, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "Is your signature authorizing a transfer? Here is your correspondence calling their actions, and I quote, a golden opportunity. And here, Mr. Jennings, is the blood money that stains your hands." The chamber erupted, reporters shouted over one another, camera lenses snapped open like weapons, lawmakers screamed for order. Outside, the chants grew into a frenzy, one word pulsing louder and louder through the chaos: "Resign, resign, resign." Jennings' smirk shattered, his face drained of color, his mouth open, then closed again, but no words came. He gripped the edges of the table, knuckles white, eyes darting desperately across the room as if searching for an escape. The camera zoomed in mercilessly, capturing every bead of sweat rolling down his temple, every twitch in his jaw. And then 10 seconds of silence, 10 seconds that stretched into eternity. 10 seconds where Scott Jennings, the untouchable spin doctor, the master manipulator, was utterly exposed, frozen like prey under the predator's gaze. On the line, the moment detonated instantly. Twitter, X flooded with a single hashtag, #JenningsFrozen. Clips of his blank stare loop endlessly, remixed with ice-cold soundtracks, mocked with captions. 10 seconds of truth. Memes spread faster than wildfire. Jennings as a statue. Jennings turned to stone. Jennings drowning in silence. The nation wasn't just watching anymore. It was reveling in his collapse. And Jasmine. She sat unmoved, her eyes locked on him like a hunter savoring the kill. She leaned toward the mic, her voice low, deliberate, every syllable a nail in his coffin. "That silence," she said, "speaks louder than every lie you've ever told." The chamber fell deadly still. Jennings remained frozen, a hollow shell under the spotlight. And as the world replayed those 10 unbearable seconds, one question carved itself into the air like prophecy. If this is only the first secret Jasmine has revealed, what devastating truth will she unleash next? The chamber had barely recovered from the silence when Jasmine Crockett struck again. With deliberate calm, she slid a second stack of documents across the table, thicker, heavier, dripping with consequences. Cameras zoomed so close that every flash of red ink on the word confidential burned into living rooms across America. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The gravity of the evidence spoke louder than thunder. "These are not rumors," she said, her tone like a blade slicing open the room. "These are certified financial records. They link you, Mr. Jennings, to a network of dark money organizations, groups that not only funded disinformation campaigns, but also paid the very individuals who marched on this Capitol, who shattered these windows, who spilled blood on these steps." A gasp ripped through the chamber, followed by chaos. Reporters shouted questions over one another, their voices colliding in a frenzy. Lawmakers jolted forward in their seats, some covering their mouths, others slamming fists on the desk. Outside, the crowd surged into pandemonium, chants of "Traitor! Traitor!" roaring so loud they rattled the chamber walls. And online explosion. Live stream comments flooded in at lightning speed, pouring down the screen, in an unstoppable avalanche. "Oh my God, is this real? Jennings caught red-handed. This is bigger than Watergate." Twitch streamers, YouTubers, and Twitter commentators clipped the moment in real time, splicing Jasmine's calm delivery against Jennings' twitching face. Within minutes, #DarkMoney Jennings trended #1 worldwide. Jennings' mask cracked, his smirk vanished, his jaw clenched, his hands fumbled with the pen he had been tapping as if it were a lifeline. He leaned into the microphone, voice strained, but the venom faltered. "Lies," he hissed, but the word didn't land with its usual sharpness. "All lies. This is a circus, a smear campaign from a desperate party grasping for headlines. These documents, they mean nothing." His throat tightened mid-sentence, and the tremor in his voice betrayed what he was trying so hard to conceal. Jasmine pounced, eyes locked on him, her voice sharp enough to pierce steel. "Lies," she repeated, savoring the word as if it were poison she refused to swallow. She leaned forward, picked up a sheet, and raised it high so the cameras could zoom in on a bold signature at the bottom. "Lies don't shake hands with your signature, Scott." The room detonated, reporters screamed, some nearly climbing over each other for a closer shot. Lawmakers erupted into shouting matches, the gavel hammering again and again to restore order. Outside, the chants became a roar of blood and thunder, echoing through the Capitol dome. Across America, millions of jaws dropped as the truth unfolded before them, undeniable and irreversible. Jennings froze, his lips quivering, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. For the first time, he looked smaller than the stage he had once dominated, shrinking under the weight of his own deceit. The camera caught everything: the sweat, the stammer, the fracture of a man unraveling in real time. And as the crowd roared louder, as America drowned in disbelief and fury, the question cut through the nose like lightning across a blackened sky. Will this mountain of evidence be the endgame that buries Scott Jennings, or does he still have one last card left to play? The walls of the chamber shook with noise, the air buzzing with 1,000 gasps, 1,000 furious whispers. Jennings, cornered like an animal trapped in its own snare, suddenly snapped. His face twisted crimson, veins pulsing along his neck, his fist slamming the desk hard enough to rattle the microphones. He leaned forward, eyes burning with rage, and spat the words like venom into Jasmine Crockett's face. "You're nothing but trash in a suit." The insult landed like a grenade. A collective gasp detonated through the chamber, echoing into every living room across America. Reporters froze mid-keystroke, their jaws slack in disbelief. Cameras zoomed in on Jennings' contorted face, his mask of smug control shattered beyond repair. On the line, Twitter, X exploded in shock. Did he just say trash? Jennings' meltdown live. Within seconds, hashtags erupted. Hashtag trash in ASU it. Hashtag Jennings meltdown, flooding timelines like wildfire. But Jasmine didn't recoil, she didn't even blink. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath, waiting to see if the insult had struck its target. And then, with terrifying calm, she leaned into her microphone. Her voice dropped, cold and deliberate, slicing the silence like a knife to the throat. "And you," she said, her eyes narrowing into blades, "are nothing but a puppet in chains." The chamber exploded, gasps turned into roars, half the room surging to its feet in chaos. Democrats pounded their desks, cheering, their voices rising in defiance. Republicans shouted over them, some covering their faces in disbelief, others leaping to Jennings' defense. The gavel hammered furiously, but it was useless. The chamber had transformed into a battlefield. Networks cut their feeds into a frenzy of split screens, Jennings' fury flashing across Fox News, Jasmine's icy retort blazing across CNN and MSNBC. Commentators shouted over each other, anchors interrupting with breaking banners. Historic hearing descends into chaos. Meanwhile, outside the Capitol, the crowd reached a fever pitch. One side screamed Jennings' name through megaphones, the other howled Crockett's words back at them like a war cry. "Puppet in chains. Puppet in chains." Jennings tried to recover, tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the weight of humiliation. He slammed his palm on the desk again, but the cameras caught at his trembling fingers, his quivering lip, his eyes darting wildly for allies. Every move betrayed desperation. He wasn't commanding the room anymore. He was drowning in it. And Jasmine, she sat steady, unflinching, her stare locked onto him like a predator savoring victory. She didn't need to say more. Her words still hung in the air, cutting deeper with each replay, each retweet, each cheer erupting from living rooms and protest lines across the nation. It wasn't just a clash of words anymore. It was a public unmasking, a moment of naked disgrace beamed across every screen in America. Jennings had aimed to humiliate Jasmine, but instead, he had handed her the match that set his career ablaze. And as the chants outside merged into a single deafening roar, one question thundered louder than the gavel, louder than the chaos, louder than the very walls trembling with fury. Can Scott Jennings recover from the humiliation that now defines him, or is this the moment his empire of lies begins to collapse in front of the entire world? The chamber was still buzzing from the last explosion when Jasmine raised her hand for silence. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted a single sheet of paper from the thick pile of evidence before her. The page gleamed under the harsh white lights, and the microphone seemed to lean forward as though they too needed to hear what was coming. Her voice was calm, surgical, as she began to read. Email correspondence dated January 4th. Scott Jennings to Michael D., head of a PAC currently under federal investigation. Quote, "If the chaos erupts on the 6th as expected, this will be a golden opportunity. We can leverage outrage to cement Trump's narrative and weaken Democratic control. Keep the funds flowing." End quote. The chamber detonated. Lawmakers erupted into shouting, reporters scrambled, flashes blinded the air. But Jasmine didn't look up. She kept her eyes pinned on the words, on Jennings, on the truth laid bare before the entire nation. Jennings lurched forward, his face a storm of panic. That's taken out of context. His voice cracked, the sentence collapsing into a broken rasp. He tried again, throat straining, but the words died on his tongue. The microphone caught the sound of his breath, shallow, uneven. The camera zoomed in mercilessly. Sweat streamed down his temples, glistening under the lights. His hands trembled violently as he gripped the desk, knuckles whitening, the pen he had clung to now rolling helplessly to the floor. His pupils darted from Jasmine to the committee chair to the cameras and back again, like a man cornered, searching for a crack in the wall that didn't exist. Then silence. 10 seconds, 15, 20, Jennings' mouth opened, then closed again, his lips twitching with words that refused to form. 23 seconds of unbearable, suffocating silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but deafening, soaked in humiliation, heavy as iron, echoing across the chamber, across the airwaves, into the homes of millions watching live. On Twitter, X, the moment detonated instantly. Streams of comments poured in. He froze. Jennings is done. Hashtags ignited. Hashtag Jennings frozen. Number 23 seconds. Hashtag golden opportunity. Within minutes, memes flooded every feed. Jennings turned to stone. Jennings staring into the abyss. Jennings drowning in silence replayed in endless loops. The moment became bigger than words. It became history. Inside the chamber, lawmakers exchanged stunned looks. Democrats leaned back, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others grinning at the spectacle. Republicans fidgeted, whispering frantically, eyes darting anywhere but the cameras. The gavel hammered for order, but no one was listening. The silence had already written its verdict. And Jasmine, she didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply leaned into the microphone, her tone cold as steel. That silence, Mr. Jennings, says more than any denial you could offer. America heard it, America saw it, and America will never forget it. The weight of her words pressed on the room like a final nail hammered into a coffin. Jennings slumped back in his chair, eyes hollow, body trembling, the master manipulator reduced to a broken silhouette under blinding lights. Yet, even as the nation reveled in his collapse, one question sliced through the cheers, the memes, the headlines flashing across every screen. Was this silence Jennings' defeat or the dark, cold breath before a counterattack that could shake America to its core? Night fell on Washington, but the city didn't sleep. The moment Jennings froze, 23 unbearable seconds of silence looped endlessly across every news channel. CNN ran it in slow motion, frame by frame, dissecting the beads of sweat, the twitch in his jaw, the way his lips quivered before betraying him. MSNBC branded it the collapse, while Fox scrambled to spin it as a witch hunt ambush, their anchors shouting over each other in desperate defense. Local channels replayed it alongside footage of Americans watching in bars, gas stations, even airport. Strangers huddled together, eyes wide, mouths agape. The silence had become a roar that wouldn't die. Social media turned into a battlefield. On one side surged hashtag Crockett for truth, young voters, activists, and celebrities amplifying Jasmine's words, remixing her line "Lies don't shake hands with your signature" into TikTok anthems and protest chants. Fanatics painted her as a warrior queen, fire in her eyes, holding a nation accountable with nothing but truth. On the other side, hashtag Stand with Scott Claude for relevance, pushed by bots, partisan influencers, and shadow accounts, insisting Jennings was the victim of a setup. The feed split like a cracked mirror, to Americans staring at each other with rage. For Jasmine, the firestorm came with both light and shadow. Her inbox flooded with messages of support. Students telling her she gave them hope. Single mothers thanking her for standing tall. Veterans saluting her courage. But nestled between the praise were threats, emails dripping with hatred, voicemails promising violence, anonymous accounts calling her traitor and target. Her staff huddled late into the night, debating security details, some urging her to leave Washington for safety. Jasmine refused. "If I run," she told them, her voice unshakable, "then they win." Meanwhile, Jennings' camp went into full crisis mode. Allies crowded into back rooms, advisors shouting, strategists scribbling frantic talking points on whiteboards. Leaked footage from inside his war room showed Jennings slamming his fist against a table, demanding, we bury her now." His donors called nonstop, their panic echoing through the halls of power, fear not of Jasmine, but of the truth she had dragged into the light. Lobbyists whispered about cutting ties, TV hosts demanded prepackaged defenses, and dark money networks scrambled to cover their tracks before Jasmine's next strike. The media circus only grew wilder. Late-night comedians roasted Jennings' silence, one dubbing it the longest 23 seconds in American history. Talk radio screamed about civil war. Podcasts debated whether this was the end of an era or just the beginning of a darker chapter. Across the nation, people argued in diners, classrooms, factory floors, their voices rising above the clatter of daily life. America wasn't watching a hearing anymore, it was watching a reckoning. And in the shadows, as Jasmine prepared her next move and Jennings' allies schemed to salvage what remained, one question hissed across the airwaves, whispered in strategy rooms, and screamed on the streets. How far will they go to protect their power, and what lines will they cross to silence the truth before it burns them alive? By midnight, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office, the city lights of Washington bleeding through the blinds. Her body trembled from exhaustion, her head pounding from the weight of the last 24 hours. Coffee cups littered the desk, cold and forgotten, stacks of files surrounding her like walls closing in. Outside the window, police sirens wailed in the distance, and for the first time that night, fear crept in. She had received 3 death threats before dinner, her staff had doubled her security, and the Capitol Police urged her to keep her blinds closed. Yet she kept them open. She wanted the world to see her. The pressure was crushing, but the fire inside her refused to dim. Each hateful voicemail was fuel, every online slur another match thrown into her furnace. She knew they weren't just after her, they were after what she represented. If she broke, every single voice that depended on her would feel the ground shake beneath them. Across town, in a hotel suite sealed off from prying eyes, Scott Jennings huddled with Republican operatives, the atmosphere thick with smoke and desperation. PowerPoint slides flashed across screens, attack ads, doctored headlines, false accusations drafted like bullets in a political firing squad. A strategist leaned over the table, whispering, "We paint her as unhinged, unstable, dangerous. Turn her strength into a weakness, break her credibility before she breaks us." Jennings nodded, his jaw tight, his voice low and venomous. "I don't care what it takes. We bury her name in scandal. If she's the fire, then we smother it in dirt." The war was no longer in the chamber, it was in the shadows, in the airwaves, in the hearts of millions who didn't know which version of reality to believe. Smear campaigns prepared to roll out like coordinated missile strikes, false financial ties, fabricated quotes, whispers of impropriety designed to rot trust from within. Jennings wasn't playing defense anymore, he was preparing to scorch the earth. Jasmine's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was her mother. She hesitated before answering, bracing herself. The moment she heard that familiar voice, the walls she had built around herself cracked. "Baby, I saw everything," her mother said softly, her voice heavy with both pride and fear. "You were brilliant, but they're going to come after you harder than ever. They will try to break you." Jasmine's throat tightened, her eyes burning as tears she had refused to shed all day threatened to fall. Her mother's voice hardened. "Don't let them. Don't you dare let them. You were born for this fight." Jasmine wiped her eyes, exhaled, and sat up straighter. The exhaustion didn't vanish, but something inside her shifted. The fear turned to steel, the fatigue to fury. She looked at the files on her desk, evidence, testimony, truth, and felt her resolve harden like armor. They could smear her, threaten her, drown her in lies, but they couldn't extinguish the fire she carried. Not now, not ever. And as the night bled into dawn, the question that loomed over Washington wasn't whether Jennings had the weapons to attack, but whether Jasmine's fire could withstand the storm about to crash over her like a tidal wave. Would her flame hold steady, or would it be swallowed by the darkness gathering to consume her? It happened just before sunrise. News outlets lit up with a story so scandalous it sucked the air out of the nation. A leaked report claimed Jasmine Crockett had funneled campaign donations into personal accounts, complete with falsified receipts and damning testimony from anonymous staffers. The documents spread like wildfire, screenshots plastered across Twitter, breaking alerts interrupting morning shows, radio hosts screaming betrayal into microphones. Overnight, Jasmine had gone from hero to headline scandal, but the fingerprints of orchestration were all over it. The documents were riddled with inconsistencies, wrong dates, mismatched fonts, signatures cut and pasted like a bad forgery. Analysts whispered it was a setup, a political hit job born in the dark corners of Jennings' war room. Yet by the time fact-checkers caught up, the poison was already in the bloodstream of America. Jennings, of course, played on Fox. He smirked at the camera, hands folded neatly on the desk. "I had nothing to do with this," he said, his grin betraying the denial. "That if these allegations are true, well, America deserves to know the kind of corruption we're dealing with." On another network, when pressed, he chuckled, that familiar arrogant tilt of his head. Funny how the loudest voices for truth always seem to have the dirtiest closets. His allies amplified it, their talking points polished and coordinated, spreading whispers into shouts. Inside her office, Jasmine stared at the headlines. For a moment, the weight pressed down on her chest like an anvil. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every wound she had carried for her community threatened to be drowned in the lies of a man too cowardly to face her with truth. Her staff panicked, phones ringing off the hook, reporters demanding statements, donors calling in fear. But Jasmine didn't cower. She walked to the podium, cameras flashing like lightning, and met the storm head-on. "When they cannot defeat your truth," she declared, voice trembling not with fear but with fury, "they invent their lies. These allegations are fabrications, cheap counterfeits designed to distract you from the real evidence, the real corruption, the real threat to our democracy. I have given my life to serve this country and its people, and I will not let shadow operatives smear that service with forged papers and cowardly whispers." The room erupted, reporters shouted questions, flashes seared the air, but Jasmine's words cut through with the force of a blade. Across America, living rooms split down the middle. On one side, viewers pounded their fists in solidarity, chanting her words back at the screen. On the other, suspicion and hatred spread, fueled by echo chambers hungry for blood. Hashtags battled furiously. Hashtag Crockett for truth against hashtag Crockett corrupt. It was no longer just about one woman or one strategist. It was about which version of reality the nation would embrace, the truth she had bled to reveal, or the lie they had engineered to destroy her. And as the camera froze on her unshakable stare, one question rippled through America like a tremor before an earthquake. Who will the nation believe, the puppet master spinning lies in the shadows, or the woman who refuses to bow before them? The plane touched down just after dawn, and already they were waiting for her. Hundreds crowded the airport gates, waving handmade signs painted in bold strokes. "We stand with Jasmine. Truth has a voice. Our fighter, our fire." When Jasmine Crockett stepped into view, the crowd erupted like a dam breaking. Cheers thundered, hands reached out, children hoisted on shoulders screamed her name. She wasn't just a congresswoman returning to her district. She was a warrior coming home from the battlefield. The motorcade crawled through packed streets as people lined the sidewalks, chanting, holding cell phones high to capture the moment. Jasmine lowered her window, waving, her eyes wet with the force of it. These weren't strangers, they were the people she had fought for in closed-door battles no one ever televised, the voices drowned out by lobbyists and power brokers. And now they were here, not asking her to be strong but reminding her that she already was. In the town hall that evening, the walls shook from the sheer number who squeezed inside. Veterans stood at attention, their voices breaking as they thanked her for fighting corruption that had betrayed their service. A single mother stepped forward, holding her child's hand, whispering through tears, "They told me my vote didn't count, but you told me I mattered." College students crowded the aisles, their chants of Crockett. Crockett, crashing like waves against the walls. Each story, each plea, was fuel poured into the fire raging in Jasmine's chest. The cameras captured it all. The old man clutching a faded photo of a brother killed by racially motivated violence. The teacher confessing she was afraid to tell her students the truth about January 6th. The young immigrant trembling as he thanked her for being the only one who spoke for people like him. It wasn't politics, it was raw, unfiltered America, laid bare in a chorus of pain and defiance. As Jasmine took the stage, the room hushed, the silence electric. She looked out at the sea of faces marked by struggle, weathered by disappointment, lit by fragile hope. Her voice cracked once, but then steadied, carrying like a drumbeat. "They can smear me, they can threaten me, they can bury me in lies. But they cannot bury you, they cannot silence us. Every story I heard tonight is another weapon, another truth that no smear campaign can erase. They want me to feel small, but when I stand here, with you I feel like the entire weight of this country is rising behind me." The room detonated with applause, fists in the air, voices chanting until the walls trembled. Outside, the chants spread like wildfire through the streets, echoing into the night sky. But even as Jasmine felt her spirit soar, she knew the war had only just begun. For every cheer, there was a whisper of hatred waiting in the shadows, sharpened knives at propaganda ready to be plunged again. And as America watched her transform people's stories into fuel for a revolution, One question burned hotter than the chance shaking the earth beneath her feet. Can Jasmine Crockett turn the cries of her people into a weapon powerful enough to shatter a machine built to destroy her? The counterpunch came at prime time. Scott Jennings appeared on Fox News, polished, sharp suit, that infuriating smirk carved into his face. He leaned forward into the camera as if speaking directly to the heart of America. "Let's stop pretending," he spat, voice measured but dripping with venom. "Jasmine Crockett isn't a congresswoman, she's a mob boss in lipstick. She doesn't want justice, she wants power. And she burned down the country to get it." The anchor gasped theatrically, nodding along, while the chyron flashed in bold rate. "Jennings, Crockett is a mob boss." Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Conservative influencers clipped it, echo chambers magnified it. Hashtags like #MobBossCrockett shot up trending lists. Commentators called her dangerous, unhinged, a threat to the Republic. Jennings had thrown gasoline into the fire, and the blaze spread instantly across half the nation. But Jasmine didn't flinch. That same night, she walked onto MSNBC's set, calm but blazing with fire behind her eyes. When the host asked about Jennings' insult, she let out a laugh so sharp it cut through the tension like a blade. "Mob boss," she said, shaking her head. "Deader a boss than a coward. At least I fight in the open. Jennings hides behind lies, smears, and dark money. I'll take my lipstick and truth over his cowardice and chains any day." The studio erupted in applause, and within seconds the clip went viral. #BetterAboss trended nationwide, her line echoing like a war cry through every platform. The battle lines hardened. TV networks plastered their screens with split screens of Jennings and Jasmine, dueling through sound bites, each exchange replayed, reanalyzed, weaponized. Fox played Jennings on loop, calling her unfit. MSNBC looped Jasmine's retort, branding it the clapback of the year. CNN ran panels dissecting every word, framing it as a cultural flashpoint. Trash in a suit versus mob boss in lipstick is American politics now a street fight. The public was electrified. In diners, people shouted at televisions. On college campuses, students chanted Jasmine's lines as if they were slogans for a new generation. At the same time, Jennings loyalists frothed online, painting Jasmine as the embodiment of everything they feared: a woman of color with power, unapologetic and unstoppable. Behind the scenes, donors poured millions into ad campaigns, negative spots hitting airwaves within hours, grainy images of Jasmine, ominous music, the words "mob boss" in lipstick flashing across screens. The Jasmine supporters countered with their own ads, montages of her fiery speeches, community members' testimonials, clips of Jennings frozen in silence. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was open war, waged in living rooms, smartphones, and every corner of American life. And as the rhetoric sharpened, as the insults turned to weapons and the media fanned the flames higher and higher, one question spread like wildfire across the nation's collective conscience. Would this war of words remain a battle of sound bites or spiral into something so irreversible it could shatter the very core of American democracy? The chamber had barely settled when the shouting began. One voice cut through first, an angry Republican accusing Jasmine of grandstanding, then another, and another, until the entire hall erupted into a cacophony of rage. Lawmakers rose to their feet, pointing, jabbing, hurling words that sounded less like debate and more like war cries. Tapers flew, gavels slammed, microphones squealed. The hearing was no longer a hearing, it was a battlefield dressed in suits. Jennings leaned back in his chair, stoking the fire with every sneer. "This is your champion," he barked across the floor, gesturing at Jasmine. "A fraud, a mob boss, a disgrace." His words were gasoline, and the flames roared higher. Some members lunged forward, security guards stepping between them as hands nearly turned into fists. For a moment, America watched its Congress teeter on the edge of chaos, a fistfight threatening to break out beneath the dome where laws were meant to be written. The cameras broadcasted it live, millions watching as democracy seemed to disintegrate in real time. Anchors gasped over the footage, commentators whispered that they had never seen anything like it. Social media exploded with disbelief, hashtags cascading down timelines, #Congress in chaos, #democracy on fire, #Jennings vs Crockett. For the public, it was no longer abstract politics, it was a war zone on national television. Through it all, Jasmine stood motionless at her desk, her hand pressed against the stack of evidence in front of her. She didn't shout, didn't flinch, didn't let herself be dragged into the spectacle. Her silence burned hotter than their nose, and when she finally rose, the chamber seemed to stop on instinct. The gavel struck desperately, but it was Jasmine's voice that silenced the chaos. Her words were fire. America is not for sale. Not to billionaires, not to traitors, not to Scott Jennings. Each phrase cracked like thunder, reverberating through the chamber, blasting across the live feed into homes and phones around the nation. The lawmakers froze, their fury swallowed by the sheer force of her conviction. Jennings blinked, his grin faltering as the camera cut to his pale face. The chamber erupted again, but this time, not in chaos. Democrats cheered, pounding their desks in rhythm. The gallery roared, some chanting Jasmine's name, others rising to their feet. Republicans shouted back, but their voices were drowned in the tidal wave of sound. For the first time in decades, the floor of Congress felt less like a legislature and more like an arena, and Jasmine Crockett stood at its center like a warrior with fire in her lungs. On live television, anchors stammered, unable to keep up with the spectacle. This is unprecedented," one muttered, while another whispered, "We are watching history crack open." Across America, people sat stunned, breathless, as if the very soul of the Republic was splitting before their eyes. And in that electric silence between applause and outrage, one question rose above the smoke, the fury, the spectacle. Would this battle ignite a rebirth for American democracy or destroy Congress itself under the weight of its own fury? The chaos of Congress bled into the morning headlines, but beneath the nose, something unexpected began to shift. Not every Republican could stomach Jennings' venom. Whispers spread in back corridors, hushed conversations between moderates who had grown tired of watching their party burn its credibility for the sake of one man's arrogance. They saw in Jasmine not just an opponent, but a woman who refused to break even when knives were at her throat. Quietly, cautiously, they began to edge away from Jennings. Jennings, meanwhile, doubled down. He stormed through hallways with his entourage, berating colleagues who didn't defend him loudly enough. His voice carried, sharp and vicious, accusing even his own allies of cowardice. But the more he barked, the more his circle thinned. Doors that once swung open to him now closed. Whispers cut short when he entered a room. The strategist who once pulled strings from the shadows now looked like a man tangled in his own web. Then came the moment no one expected. At a rally in Jasmine's district, as the crowd surged with chants of her name, a figure stepped onto the stage, a decorated veteran, a lifelong Republican who had broken with his party after January 6th. The air shifted instantly. The crowd hushed, cameras zoomed. The veteran extended his hand, and Jasmine, hesitating only for a second, took it. Their handshake wasn't just symbolic, it was seismic. A Democrat firebrand and a Republican veteran, joined not by party, but by disgust for corruption. The image flashed across every screen in America, front-page headlines screaming, "Unity against Jennings." Jennings watched from a hotel suite, the handshake replaying on loop across networks. His jaw clenched, his smirk finally gone, eyes dark with something more dangerous than anger. Fear. For the first time, he was the one on the outside, watching alliances form against him. The silence that once haunted him was now mirrored by the emptiness of allies abandoning ship. America sensed the tide turning, the battle lines blurred, cracks opened in the fortress Jennings had built. And as Jasmine stood on stage, hand in hand with the man who once might have opposed her, the nation held its breath, wondering if history was being rewritten in real time. Was Scott Jennings finally cornered, or was this the moment he would bare his fangs and fight back with something darker than anyone had yet seen? Scott Jennings was cornered, but instead of retreating, he bared his teeth. At a hastily arranged press conference, cameras blazing and microphones thrust forward, he launched his most desperate attack yet. "The real corruption," he declared, voice sharp and performative, "isn't with me, it's with Jasmine Crockett. This so-called crusader of truth has been funneling campaign cash into her own pockets. She talks about fighting for the people, but she's nothing more than a hypocrite with blood on her hands." He held up a stack of papers, doctored, flimsy, but waved them with the confidence of a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. The media exploded. Networks cut into regular programming with breaking alerts. Jennings accuses Crockett of corruption. Commentators scream over each other, Social media feeds flooded with speculation, hashtags clashing like dueling swords, hashtag corrupt Crockett versus hashtag stand with Jasmine. For a moment, the smear looked like it might land. Even allies glanced nervously, fearing the shadow it cast. But Jasmine had anticipated the strike. That evening, she called her own press conference, the marble steps of the Capitol glowing beneath floodlights, a sea of supporters gathered at her back. She walked to the podium holding a thick binder, every page a record of her finances, every transaction documented, audited, transparent. Her voice was steady, her tone unflinching. "This," she said, raising the binder height, "is my entire financial history, every dollar raised, every cent spent. I will not allow Scott Jennings to poison this country with forged lies. I have nothing to hide. Can he say the same?" The crowd erupted, their chant rolling like thunder through the night air. "We believe Jasmine. We believe Jasmine." The sound carried into the live broadcast, echoing into millions of homes, drowning out Jennings' accusations with raw defiance. Reporters leaned forward, captivated by the sight of a politician turning the blade of transparency back against her accuser. On Twitter, X, hashtags flipped almost instantly. Hashtag WeBelieveJasmine surged past Jennings' smear, trending #1. Memes mocking his evidence as cheap forgeries created in a back alley. Jennings watched from backstage somewhere, his face pale, lips tight, realizing the gambit hadn't just failed, it had backfired. The more he swung, the more Jasmine seemed to rise above, her integrity shining brighter against the darkness of his propaganda. And yet, the war was far from over. The smear had left scars, sowed doubt in millions of minds, and Jennings wasn't finished. The nation braced itself, torn between light and shadow, truth and deception. Would Jasmine's truth continue to outshine the poison of propaganda, or was Jennings preparing an even darker strike to drag America deeper into chaos? The chamber was already tense before the gavel struck. The air buzzed with anticipation, cameras locked in, millions watching live. Scott Jennings came in like a storm, his voice raised before the first question even left a committee chair's lips. "This entire circus is a fraud," he bellowed, veins bulging at his neck. He pointed across the room at Jasmine, spitting insults like bullets. "She's a liar, a manipulator, a disgrace to Congress. She doesn't care about truth, she only cares about her own fame." The chamber quaked with his rage. Republicans shouted their approval. Democrats roared back in anger. Security guards stepped forward as if bracing for chaos. Jennings pounded the desk so hard that papers scattered, his face twisted into something wrought, unrecognizable, a man unraveling in real time. For a moment, it seemed his fury might consume the entire room. And then Jasmine moved. She didn't shout over him. She didn't even wait for the gavel. She rose slowly, commanding silence not with nose, but with presence. The insults still rained down, Jennings' voice echoing, until Jasmine's hand lifted, palm open, demanding quiet. And in that pause, with every camera trained on her, she delivered the line that would sear itself into history. "Scott Jennings is not America," she said, her voice low, deliberate, charged with a fury sharper than his screams. She stepped closer to the mic, eyes burning into him. "He's its disease." The words detonated, the gallery erupted, people leaping to their feet in a standing ovation, their applause crashing like thunder against the chamber walls. Reporters gasped, commentators whispered into hot mics, anchors across networks stammered, "Did she just?" Hashtags ignited instantly. Hashtag Jennings is the disease. Hashtag Crockett strikes. The words spreading like wildfire across every feed, every timeline. Jennings froze, his mouth half open, the fury in his face curdling into something weaker, more fragile. He tried to bark back, but the cheers drowned him out, the camera catching every flicker of panic, every bead of sweat. For the first time, it wasn't Jasmine defending herself, it was Jennings on trial before the nation. And Jasmine had just pronounced the verdict. The ovation lasted nearly a full minute, echoing far beyond the marble chamber, pulsing through televisions and radios and cell phones. It was more than applause, it was a declaration. And as the roar subsided, one question hung heavier than the silence Jennings had once endured. Was this Jasmine Crockett's death blow, the strike that Jennings could never recover from, or would the wounded strategist find a way to crawl back and drag America into darkness with him? The stage was set for the final showdown. Every major network cut to live coverage, their banners screaming, "Crockett vs. Jennings, the deciding battle. Across America, bars muted music, classrooms rolled in televisions, families gathered in silence. It wasn't politics anymore, it was a prize fight for the soul of the nation. Scott Jennings walked in already unraveling. His collar damp with sweat, his hands trembling as he gripped the lectern, he launched into a barrage of incoherent shouts, lies, smears, this is all a damn setup. His words tumbled out without rhythm, his voice cracking, spit flying. He pointed at Jasmine like a desperate man trying to conjure enemies out of shadows. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly on his flushed face, catching every stammer, every twitch, every bead of sweat rolling under the lights. And then Jasmine rose, calm, steady, her movements surgical. She didn't waste words, each sentence landed like a dagger, precise and lethal. America deserves truth. Jennings gave it poison. America deserves leadership. Jennings sold it to the highest bidder. America deserves hope. Jennings offered only fear. Her voice never wavered, her stare never softened. The contrast was blinding, his chaos against her control, his desperation against her discipline. The nation held its breath. On social media, streams of comments cascaded like floodwaters. She's cutting him to pieces. Jennings is finished. Even in living rooms divided by ideology, people could feel it, the shift, the sense that history itself was being carved in real time. The camera cut to a split screen. Jennings crumbling, Jasmine unwavering. And as the debate reached its breaking point, one question thundered louder than the applause, the outrage, the chants flooding the streets. Who will history remember after today, Scott Jennings, the unraveling strategist, or Jasmine Crockett, the unbreakable firebrand who stood her ground? The tension snapped like glass. Jennings, face flushed crimson, fists clenched, suddenly shoved his chair back so hard it screeched across the marble floor. "This is a sham," he roared, voice cracking as he pointed one last trembling finger at Jasmine. "You'll regret this." His words dissolved into incoherence, swallowed by his own fury. And then, with millions watching live, he stormed out of the chamber, slamming the heavy oak door behind him so violently, that the sound echoed like a gunshot through history. Gasps rippled across the room, reporters scrambled, their cameras spinning to catch his retreating figure, microphones catching only the roar of chaos in his wake. Within seconds, headlines ignited. Jennings humiliated, strategist storms out. Collapse of a titan, networks replayed the clip in endless loops. Jennings' red face, his quivering lip, the door slam that became a symbol of his unraveling. And in the center of the storm, Jasmine did not move. She stood at the podium, calm, radiant, her composure a blade sharper than any insult hurled her way. She let the silence hang for a moment, let America drink in the sight of one man breaking and another voice rising. Then she leaned into the microphone, her words clear and cutting through the chaos like a bell in the night. "Truth may bend," she said, her voice carrying into every home, "but it does not break." The chamber erupted not in chaos this time, but in applause, cheers, chants. Outside, the crowd thundered her name, their voices shaking the ground. On social media, her words spread like wildfire, tattooed instantly into the memory of a divided nation. And yet beneath the triumph, one question lingered in every mind like a shadow behind the light. What happens when a corrupt empire finally crumbles? Does it vanish quietly, or does it drag the world down with it? The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Jasmine Crockett stepped into the night. What awaited her was not silence, but a roar. Thousands packed onto the Capitol steps, their chants shaking the ground. "Jasmine! Jasmine! Jasmine!" Phone screens lit the darkness, banners waved high, tears streamed down faces of strangers who now felt like family. The sound was deafening, but for Jasmine, it was more than noise. It was the heartbeat of a nation refusing to surrender. She paused at the top of the steps, eyes sweeping across the sea of people. In their faces she saw the journey etched, the mothers who had cried to her on late-night calls, the veterans who had begged her not to give up, the students who had carried her words into the streets. For a moment, the exhaustion of sleepless nights, the fear of death threats, the bruises of battle, all of it lifted. What remained was fire, pure, unyielding fire. Taking the microphone, she let the cheers fade into an electric hush, her voice carried like a hymn. Steady, resolute, this fight is not over. It never ends. But tonight proves something they wanted us to forget. When one voice dares to rise, millions more will follow. The crowd erupted, their chants morphing into a tidal wave of defiance, their fists raised against the night sky. Cameras captured it all, the Congresswoman silhouetted against the Capitol dome, no longer just a politician, but a symbol, a spark that refused to be extinguished. And as the noise grew louder, echoing into living rooms, into hearts across America, Jasmine's final words cut through the roar like lightning. The question now isn't whether I will rise again. The question is, will you be the next to rise? Jasmine's journey shows us that even in the darkest storms, one voice of truth can ignite a fire no lie can extinguish. Her courage proves that when you stand tall, you don't just fight for yourself, you fight for everyone who has ever been silenced. And that is the power we all carry inside us. If this story moved you, let your voice rise too. Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit that like button to keep the fire alive, and subscribe so together we can keep building a community that refuses to back down. Because the question isn't whether Jasmine will rise again, the question is, will you rise with her? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.